Hello everyone, it's Lindsay, and today I'm back with another faith journaling process video for you guys as we wrap up issue 3 of the Take 4 series from Open Journey. The theme of this one has been Seek. Now this was the kit for the month of August. We are working on week 5 today, and then hopefully I will also be filming the word study for the word Seek, and then we'll be done. I am a little bit behind. Fridays are my only day to film with being back in school. My husband decided to go back to school full-time and work full-time. And we're nuts. We are nuts over here. So we're trying to get caught up. So I will be diving into Heart Cut and getting us caught up for September. You may already be seeing a new kit from Open Journey. It is issue 5, Fishers of Men. That will be the kit we're working through in October. Now, she is already releasing that because of her subscription service. So at Open Journey, there's a few different options. You can order the kits standalone individually. There's just the devotional. There's digital, there's physical, all that goodness. But she also has a subscription. So if you sign up by September 10th, your subscription will start with October's kit, issue 5, Fishers of Men. So that's why you're already starting to see that. If you sign up for a subscription after September 10th, it will start with the following month's kit. So I'm really feeling the pressure, feeling like we need to get caught up. And so unfortunately, I'm a little disappointed in myself because as we come to this final week, week 5, this particular passage really could use several videos just on this passage. This is actually the 3rd attempt that I have filmed this intro. I just have so much that I want to pack in here for you, and I feel like I'm trying to rush through it, and so then things are not really being clearly conveyed. And so I just asking for a little bit of grace. Please know that my heart is from a place of care and concern, and I want you to grow deeper in your knowledge of the Lord and to experience the peace and comfort that comes from that drawing closer to Him. And so we're going to touch on some hard things in here. And so again, like I said, just know a lot of this is coming from my own personal experience, that I have experience with this. And so I'm kind of sharing from that perspective. And so also sharing, resources that you can do your own study with, and definitely, of course, going to the Word of God first and foremost. But there is a lot here, so let's dive right in. As we look at week 5, there is a set of free PDF study notes down below for you guys. This is a long one. This is 18 pages of notes. There's a lot. So at the end, you can find the resources that I used to compile these notes. I'm just going to kind of point out a few key things, but definitely want to go in and do your own study. There's so much that I'm going to have to cut out of this that is really, really important for you guys to get out of here. This is just a really, really good It's a really, really good study, so please take advantage of it. Now, as you're reading 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10, you may notice there is no word seek in here, and we are doing seek. So what's up with that? So you need to read the devotional from Ingrid to understand the context of why she's including this set of passages. Kind of the overarching theme of all of this series, the Word of God, rest, now we're looking at seek, is, looking and finding comfort in God in the hard times, in the difficult times. And so that is kind of what we're, kind of looking at as the broad umbrella over this. And so as you come to the end of her devotional, she's kind of talking about that, these times that we are seeking God through prayer when things are hard, and how God responds to those prayers. It isn't always yes. And so she says, often the answer to our prayers, or the way our God manifests Himself to us and shows His presence, is not what we thought it would be. Often we want the big and the bang. We want to see sparks flying and the earth shaking, and yet He is in the small whisper and in the thorn that has not been removed. And so she gives 1 Kings 19:12 as an example of a big and the bang answer to a prayer, and then 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10 as a whisper through a thorn as an answer to a prayer. She says we have to remember that every time we feel helpless, overwhelmed, lacking joy, or empty, it is a great and very useful reminder that, as He says, apart from me, you can do nothing. John 15:5. Therefore, seek Him continually and pray, and pretty soon you will see every common bush afire with God. Now, I'm not going to touch on the common bush of fire with God. You can read about that in her devotional. We are looking specifically at the thorn in Paul's flesh. So in her devotional, she's kind of condensed it to, a small little section here out of 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. I'm including the entire thing here for you so that you have that right at your disposal. I'm reading from the NASB translation. I also have the ESV, the NIV. I've written from a lot of different translations. I know that I've talked about this passage a few times, kind of briefly, has been addressed in a variety of different videos. And so there has been some talk about, studying what exactly is being talked about in this passage. And the Strong's Concordance, so where we do our word studies, does use the King James Version as its reference Bible for all that information. I am not a King James diehard. I know that there are some of you out there who are. I almost am have an aversion to it because of that. There were translations before the King James Version, and there have been translations after the King James Version that I would even argue are better, because some more manuscripts have been found since the King James Version was put out. And so I would always encourage you to look at a variety of different translations, not the Passion, not the Message. Those are no. But, just looking at a variety of different translations, to see some of the differing words that they use may help you have a better understanding. I did my study with this in the NASB and found the same things that people were finding in the King James Version. So that's not the end all be all for translations, but use what you're comfortable with. I tend to use what my pastor's using because that just works. I did recently get, somebody had gifted me, a sweet friend here gifted me the Legacy Standard Bible. So that's a new translation for me. I've been using that one. I've really enjoyed it. And then in these notes, I do include John MacArthur's notes from my study Bible. I have since gotten a new study Bible, the Reformation Study Bible, which is R.C. Sproul's study Bible. And so I didn't have that in time to include those here in the notes. But it's been really interesting to see kind of the differing viewpoints. If you're not familiar with MacArthur and R.C. Sproul, they are modern day theologians. MacArthur is still alive. He pastors a church here in California. R.C. Sproul passed away a few years ago. But during their lifetime, R.C. Sproul and MacArthur were actually really good friends. And even as friends, they differed on viewpoints about some key things. I don't completely agree with R.C. Sproul about some things, but it's been neat having his commentary also to kind of compare and contrast. Ultimately, we want to go to the Word of God to gain our information, but it is helpful to have these men who've studied the Bible in depth and commentate on it to kind of help us understand what the Bible is saying. But I like to look at a wide variety of commentaries and then kind of compare and contrast, see what they're saying is the same, what's different, and that kind of thing. And so that's why I include a lot of variety in here. And you'll find that specifically with this passage, there were some differing ideas. So this passage is talking about Paul, the Apostle Paul. 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10 says, "Because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, for this reason, to keep me from exalting myself, there was given me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me, to keep me from exalting myself. Concerning this, I implored the Lord 3 times that it might leave me. And he has said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness.' Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I am well content with weaknesses, with insults, with distresses, with persecutions, with difficulties, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong." So as we read this, many of us, may zoom in on the thorn in the flesh. We may be very familiar with that reference when it comes to Paul. And as we read through the notes, there's a lot of differing opinions about what the thorn in the flesh is. I have seen really great, defense for all of these different perspectives. Whether it was like a physical ailment, migraines, blindness. There is a spiritual component. Maybe it's an actual person within the church at the time that was a false teacher that was a thorn in his side. I have seen defense for all of those things. And I think it's very easy to get kind of caught up in the weeds of that as we look at this passage. I don't think that that's what is important in this passage. The importance is God's sufficiency, Christ's sufficiency in our weakness. That is what this is about. And I almost like that it is a little bit, you could argue any of those things, physical, spiritual, mental, because then it allows you to apply this to all the very different, thorns of your flesh that you might be dealing with. And it doesn't matter what it is. Ultimately, our weakness is a time when God's strength shines through. And so, we may never know entirely what that thorn in the flesh is, but there are a few different explanations here. I have several articles from gotquestions.org. What was Paul's thorn in the flesh? This goes in depth talking about some of the different things it could be, and gives, references and a defense for what that could be. So you can read through those. I mentioned, MacArthur Study Bible. MacArthur, and this is kind of why I've started acquiring some other study Bibles to refer to as well. I really love my MacArthur Study Bible. I appreciate the things that he has in there, but MacArthur has a way about him sometimes that can be a little aggressive, a little like, I am right, you are wrong. And I know that his heart is from a place, of wanting us to know scripture, but, he is very sure of what he thinks that thorn in the flesh is, and he gives a good defense for it. But I've seen a good defense for some other things as well. And so I wanted to have some differing perspectives. And so that's why I started pulling in some additional study notes. So just know, just because I share those doesn't mean that I always completely agree with MacArthur's study. I'm not like a MacArthur diehard. I listen to a lot of different people. That's just what I had, on hand when I was compiling these. And so there is an article here, what does it mean that God's grace is sufficient? So you can go through and take a look at that. Anywhere that you see bold purple print, that's a hyperlink. So it'll either take you to that verse that's being referenced. You can read it right in line with the article, but it also links to some additional articles for you. False apostles, knowing Christ, thorn in my flesh. I'm sure that one takes you back to this, what was Paul's thorn in the flesh article. So you can really go, in depth looking at some of these articles, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to point out a few different things here. There's also this article, what does it mean that when I am weak, then I am strong? For somebody new to studying the Bible, that might sound weird. That might sound contradictory. What do you mean, when I'm weak, then I am strong? No, I don't feel very strong when I'm weak. And so what does that mean? And so kind of diving into this, we'll start to look here. And it says, like the Apostle Paul, we need not be ashamed of our weaknesses, whatever they may be. For some, it could be an enduring illness that God hasn't taken away. Other weaknesses might include shyness, poverty, illiteracy, or speech impediments. We all have limitations and tend to conceal them, striving to appear stronger than we truly are. Paul offers an alternative perspective, showing gratitude for our weaknesses. And so that's what we see Paul doing here. Paul is sharing that he was, as a messenger of Satan to torment him, he was given a thorn in his flesh, to keep him from exalting himself, to keep him from being prideful. If you have followed the story of Paul, then you know Paul used to be Saul. Saul, before he was a Christian, persecuted Christians, killed hordes of Christians. That's what Saul was known for until God called him to himself. Saul answered, became a Christian, started following Jesus, and then started out on this path of being an apostle and sharing the truth of God with, that area of the world. And he changed his name to Paul. And then you read his journey was not easy once he became a Christian. It was, in fact, more difficult. He lived a pretty exalted life as Saul before he was a Christian. And then as a Christian, he spent, shipwrecks, time in jail, disease, all kinds of things that he dealt with. But he also witnessed many miracles of God's, God bringing an angel into prison and opening the door and getting Paul out of prison and, all these different things. And there's even, reference here to he was taken up into heaven. Paul saw heaven. And so through all of that witnesses of the miracles and the things that God did in his life, he could easily be prideful. Look at what God did in my life. Look at what God's doing for me. I'm so great, bringing all these people to Jesus. And so this is saying that, through a messenger of Satan, God brought a thorn into his flesh to humble him a little, to keep him from being too prideful, to give him a weakness. And Paul did petition to God, petition to Jesus, actually. We see Lord is the reference he uses, asking him to remove that thorn. But it wasn't removed. The answer was no. And so then he becomes content with that. So, okay, is through my weakness that the power of Christ will be seen. And so Paul's concept of embracing weakness runs counter to prevailing beliefs about the Christian journey. In many circles, acknowledging weakness is seen as a lack of faith. However, the Bible does not deny human weaknesses. On the contrary, it affirms that we are inadequate without the Almighty. And you can see those references there. Apart from Jesus, we can do nothing. John 15:5, that's what Ingrid had for us there. Pretending to be strong and boasting about one's aptitude are characteristics of false teachers, and there's no need for us to live in falsehood. And that's one of the reasons that I share so much about our journey in my life with my own health and the struggles we've been through over the years, marriage and all those things. And then as we walk through this with my son, an epilepsy diagnosis, cancer diagnosis, it isn't to be like, oh, look at us, we're so great, we are walking through this just fine, our lives are great. No, our lives are a freaking mess. But it is through all those really difficult things that I can sit here today and tell you that my relationship with God is the strongest and the best that it has ever been because of all of that. Because I finally was able to surrender and admit that God was in control and I can only do things or get through it or have peace through it because of him. And that is it. It is not because of me, because I am weak. I am a mess. And I have tried so many things over the years, and I'll kind of talk about that as we continue on, relying on things of the world, relying on things, of myself. And it was just never enough. It says, furthermore, in Paul's personal testimony, when I am weak, then I am strong, teaches us that there are instances when God may answer a prayer request with a no. This truth can be challenging to accept, but even on a human level, if an individual has difficulty saying no, it's considered a fault. Some things should be said no to. God is not a yes man, and the purpose of prayer isn't to obtain our desires as much as to align ourselves with God's will. Paul grasped this invaluable lesson, and we will be blessed if we do the same. It isn't talked much about from the pulpit about the times that God says no. We're encouraged, pray to God. He will answer your prayers. He'll answer your prayers. He'll answer your prayers. Yeah, and sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is silence for a long time. Sometimes the answer is a whisper, like Ingrid mentions. It isn't always, yes, it's fixed. You just need to pray harder until he answers yes and he's going to fix it. Sometimes he says no, and we have seen that. We prayed for Connor's healing. Connor is cancer-free as of today, but is not how we wanted it to look. We did the more conservative surgery that left part of his thyroid in. We were told that most often when you have part of your thyroid, you don't need lifetime medication, that it was a very small percentage that would need medication. Well, we found out last week that small piece of thyroid that they left isn't working. And so even with all the fighting that we did to get the surgery that we thought was good for him, he still has to be on medication for the rest of his life. And they also found that the tumor tested for a mutation that makes it a more aggressive form of cancer than we initially thought. And so in all actuality, the cancer is at a higher chance of returning now. So that's not at all the answer to the prayer that we thought we were going to get. But we know that that's God's will. And we know that God is in control of that and that God has a purpose for that. And we just keep praying that it is through that Connor sees his need for God, and then he draws closer to God and deepens his relationship, comes to know him in an intimate way through all of that. So MacArthur, talking about a thorn in the flesh, like I said, MacArthur believes that it is a false teacher within the church at that time. And so he gives some basis for that. But he said, Satan was the immediate cause, but God was the ultimate cause. And so you may miss this part about a messenger of Satan to torment me. And this is the thing, my husband and I, we've been doing a lot of study into more of the spiritual side of Christianity that, we read about it, but it isn't really focused on, demons and the spiritual world. And not that we want to get super caught up into focusing on that, but it is a really present part of the world. There's this whole spiritual battle that's happening around us that we can't see. And so while as Christians who have the Holy Spirit indwelling inside of them cannot be possessed by demons, we cannot have Satan inside of us if we have Christ inside of us. God still can step aside and let Satan poke at us. but that's still within God's control. He is allowing that to happen for our good. The same way that we do with our children, right? As parents, we tell them no, 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 and they keep insisting. So finally we go, okay, touch the stove. And only hopefully take that one time of you touching it to realize that I was trying to stop you from something that I knew wasn't good for you, but now you need to experience it to understand it wasn't good for you. And so, sometimes God steps aside and lets Satan, poke at us, but God is still controlling that. And so he says, as with Job, we saw that with Job. Job was a faithful follower of God. And it was because of that, God knew that he would sustain his belief, even as Satan destroyed Job's life, took away his family, took away his health, his friends, all of that. God allowed that to happen. And so God's allowing this messenger of Satan to be a thorn in Paul's side here. And so there you can see kind of MacArthur's explanation for what he thinks that thorn is. But to keep me from exalting myself, the assault was painful but purposeful. God was allowing Satan to bring this severe trouble in the church for the purpose of humbling Paul, who, having had so many revelations, including a trip to heaven and back, would have been proud. The demonized false apostles attacking his work in Corinth was the stake being driven through his otherwise proud flesh. Again, from that perspective of it being an actual person, causing problems in the church in Corinth. But like I said, Paul had all these reasons to be proud. He'd done all these amazing things, but having that thorn in his flesh humbled him, reminded him that he was still just weak flesh, that God was in control of his life. And so he implores Jesus 3 times, asking him to remove the thorn. But like Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, right before he went to the cross, Jesus was asking God, take this cup, if it be your will. Jesus asking, I don't want, please, I don't want to have to do this. Both Paul and Jesus had the request denied, but were granted grace to endure their ordeals. So if Jesus was told no, that he was going to have to go through this hard thing, what makes us think that we are better than Jesus in that situation, right? But God gave Jesus the strength to endure the hardship of that torture as he was led to the cross to be murdered on it. And so like that, Paul was told, no, not removing the thorn, but I will give you the strength to endure this ordeal. And so God might not take away whatever that thorn is in your life, but if you turn to him, look to him, depend on him, lean on him, he will give you the strength. And it may be strength as you lay in bed, unable to move, physically weak, but he gives you this, that's still his will for whatever reason. He wants you there. Take advantage of that. Pray for your friends, pray for your family. There is a reason why he's doing what he's doing. It's hard. I know it's hard. I've been there. It says, my grace is sufficient for you in verse 9. The present tense of the verb translated is sufficient reveals the constant availability of divine grace. God would not remove the thorn as Paul had requested, but would continually supply him with the grace to endure it. And you can see cross references there for that. It says, the weaker the human instrument, the more clearly God's grace shines forth. Paul took no pleasure in the pain itself, but rejoiced in the power of Christ that it revealed through him. Going on, I have David Guzik commentary there for you guys. Lots and lots and lots that you can read through. I can't remember if he has a different perspective about the thorn, but he says, Paul punched about by the devil. Who would have thought it? Perhaps you've looked into the face of a Christian who's always smiling, who never seems to have any worry, is always happy and radiant. And as you have thought about your own circumstances, you have said in your heart, I wish I were he. He seems to have no problems. He doesn't have to take what I do. But perhaps you have lived long enough, as I have, to know that sometimes the most radiant face hides great pressures. And often the man who is being most blessed of God is being most buffeted by the devil. I have been there. I've said, why us? Why does it look like that person over there has such an easier life than I do? Only God sees it all, guys. We don't get to see it all. You only get to see a little glimpse. You only get to see a little glimpse of my life here, of somebody on Instagram, even somebody at church, even somebody in your family. You're not with them 24/7 in their brain, seeing their thoughts, seeing the things that they battle with. We all have different things that we're battling with. And just because I've been able to walk through these difficult seasons, maybe in a way that you think is easier than what you have been able to walk through yours, it's only by the grace of God that I've been able to do that. It's not because of me. And you're not seeing all of the behind the scenes. I'm just trying to walk through it with grace in a way, not to say, look at how great I am, but look how great God is, because he's carried us through it. Continuing on here, it says it's interesting to consider. Okay, so this is one I do want to give a caveat and just say, please take this with grace. Know that I'm coming at this one with personal experience. And I think it's something that's really important. I know there's going to be unique cases, unique situations. So just know I'm not talking about those unique cases, unique situations. This is kind of a general discussion. But in our society today, there is this hyper focus on having a therapist, depression and anxiety medications, all these things. And I mean, like my boys have walked through this with their friends at school. Like literally everybody they know goes to therapy sessions. And we had to walk through this with somebody in our family, very close. And we had to seek counseling, but we sought biblical counseling from a pastor. Now, I know, again, there's going to be extraneous circumstances where you're going to need more than that. But the world is quick to tell us, just talk about your feelings with a therapist. And if they are not of a biblical mindset, they are not going to give you a biblical remedy for what you're dealing with. Okay? So, and please just know, I'm coming at this from personal experience for a loved one in my family, for myself personally. I was on depression and anxiety medications from the time I was like 14, 15 years old, probably, maybe no, maybe 16. Those were the absolute darkest times of my life on that medication. I am now, years past that and can see the damage that did to my life, seeking those for comfort, seeking those as ways to solve the problems that I was having. And the problem was a lack of Jesus early on. I went through postpartum depression, all of these things. And think about the things we were learning about today as we start discovering that, the problems with some of these medications, that the lies that have been told about these medications, they don't even do what they've been telling us that they do. So please just give me some grace as we walk through this next one. But I think it's really, really important as we were talking about these weaknesses and that kind of thing. It says, it is interesting to consider what a counselor without a biblical perspective might have said to Paul. Imagine that Paul tells the counselor about his great infirmity, his troublesome thorn in the flesh, and how Paul feels weak and powerless to continue on against it. We might imagine that the counselor would say, well, Paul, what you need is a positive mental outlook to meet this problem. Or he might say, Paul, the power is within you to conquer this infirmity. You should look deep within the inner man to find the resources for success. Perhaps the counselor would then tell Paul, what you really need is a support group of caring individuals. The counselor might suggest Paul take medication for depression, or he might even seek to challenge Paul by saying, Paul, if you really had faith, you would be delivered from this thorn in the flesh. Some of this advice might be good in different circumstances, but Paul will take this problem to the wonderful counselor, and he has something different to say. So I do believe, we're talking about a support group is referenced here. I do believe that God uses people in our lives to deliver his message, to be, there to help us. Those are other Christians that have the word of God as their, compass for their life. Again, there's always going to be crazy instances that don't fit within this mold. But going to a therapist who is trained at some liberal college that has no Bible on campus, they're going to give you worldly solutions to your issues. And it really just comes down to a lack of Jesus, a lack of trust in God. If it's not a physical ailment, if it's not a chemical imbalance, if it's not, yes, there are all those things. But sitting there and just talking about our problems with other people who aren't Christians, just to talk, just to pet each other and get each other all, you're great, don't worry. Like, that does not solve the problem. God solves the problem. And again, I can say this from personal experience. Even as a Christian, I would say there was a place for medication, a place for therapies, a place for all of that. And as I've grown in my relationship with God, and, there have been moments where I want to turn to worldly things to find comfort, and I made the choice to turn to God, it worked out better for me. And so, I'm just speaking from my own personal experience. This is not medical advice. I guess I should give that right off the bat. Don't just stop your medication if you're on medication. Definitely speak to your doctor about that. But I think it's really important to look at what God's word says is remedy for difficulties in our life, and what the world is saying as a remedy. Just something to think about. Again, please give me some grace on that one. We're only covering a few things in here. Going on, so when I talked about, the different ways that we can look at the thorn, it says, when his passionate and repeated plea was not answered, it must have concerned Paul. It added another dimension to this trial. It had a physical dimension in that it was a thorn in the flesh. It had a mental dimension in that it was a messenger of Satan. It had a spiritual dimension in that it was an unanswered prayer. So that's kind of why he doesn't say, Paul had migraines. Paul had epilepsy. Paul had false teacher in the church. We can take that passage, and no matter whatever the thorn is in our life, we can apply this concept to it. Let's see. Continuing on, says we often close our ears to God if he responds in a way we did not hope for or expect. How many times do we hear people say, well, God didn't answer my prayer, so God must not be real, turning away, going to do my own thing. No, God's answering. Sometimes it's in the whisper. Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is wait. Sometimes the answer is yes. But don't turn from God just because we don't like his answer. He is the Father. He knows what is ultimately the best for us. It says, Paul was desperate in his desire to find relief from this burden, but there are two ways of relief. It can come by removing the load, or by strengthening the shoulder that bears the load. Instead of taking away the thorn, God strengthened Paul under it, and God would show his strength through Paul's apparent weakness. Again, God's using it for his good. My faith is stronger sitting here today than it ever has been, and this has been one of the hardest years we've ever been through. One of the weakest times I've felt, and I put my trust in God, and now I don't have the anxiety. I don't have the heart flutter when something goes bad. I'm just like, okay, God has been faithful. I know he will be faithful in this. Might not look at like how I think it should look, but I know he will be faithful. You might be thinking, as we're going over this verse, Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And this ties perfectly in with this. This is a verse that is wildly misused and abused and cherry-picked. Funny enough, my Instagram handle at LindseyDecor 413 is actually a reference to this verse, but for the right reasons. You'll see sports people use this, I can do all things. I can win this race because I believe in Jesus. No, that is not what this is saying. Saying that, this idea that we're seeing here, that in my weakness, God's strength is made known. I can get through these hard things. I can endure these hard things. I can sit in these hard things because of the strength of God, right? Says, think about this man, Paul. Was he a weak or strong man? The man who traveled the ancient world spreading the gospel of Jesus despite the fiercest persecutions, who endured shipwrecks and imprisonment, who preached to kings and slaves, who established strong churches and trained up their leaders, was not a weak man. In light of his life and accomplishments, we would say that Paul was a very strong man, but he was only strong because he knew his weaknesses and looked outside himself for the strength of God's grace. If we want lives of such strength, we also must understand and admit our weakness and look to God alone for the grace that will strengthen us for any task. It was the grace-filled Paul who said, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And then I love this beautiful imagery. This is from Calvin. This is the quote that I thought might be something maybe that you wanted to use in your Bible journaling or something like that. He says, the valleys are watered with rain to make them fruitful, while the summits of lofty mountains remain dry. A man must become a valley if he wants to receive the heavenly rain of God's spiritual grace. The most beautiful times in my life have been in the lowest of low times. That's the time that God has shown himself the most, has grown the most. And in the easy times when I'm sitting high on the mountain, those are the driest times. Those are the times that I'm not in my word regularly, that I'm not praying, that I'm not. And then God goes, whoop, we need to push you back into the valley to remind you of who you're supposed to be relying on. Let me rain on you a little bit so that you can draw closer to me. You know, the lofty, dry mountain may seem more comfortable, but it's just that it's dry. So the valleys are watered with rain to make them fruitful, while the summits of lofty mountains remain dry. I just thought that was beautiful imagery to kind of go along with this. Spurgeon says, yet we should never think that in our lives the mere presence of a thorn means the glory and strength of Jesus would shine in us and through us. You can resist God's grace and refuse to set your mind on Jesus, and then find your thorn cursing you instead of blessing you. Without the sanctifying power of the Holy Spirit, thorns are productive of evil rather than good. In many people, their thorn in the flesh does not appear to have fulfilled any admirable design at all. It has created another vice instead of removing a temptation. So there's only two ways to go. You either admit your weakness and allow God's strength to shine through, or you're cursed by that thorn and things are just harder in your life. You start creating other vices. You start looking to other things in the world to try to be the balm to that weakness. And it's just going to be this perpetual thorn in your side. There's two different ways that you can go with this. And I've done it both ways over my life. And I can for sure say that it's way better to admit when I'm weak, give it over to God, let God help me endure through it, than for me to try to solve things on my own. Okay, so there is a lot of cross references for you to look at and to study through, and then lots of word studies. So, looking at a thorn, a messenger of Satan, sufficient, perfected, really key things to help you kind of understand maybe your perspective of what these things are in that passage. So you can take a look at those. So that is a look at the study for 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. Again, I highly encourage you to go through and read all those articles, read all the notes. Please give me a little grace. This is like the fourth time I've recorded this. I am a little bit shorter on time this time, so that's good. Try not to have an hour. And since this is the fourth time, I've already done the page. So I will go ahead and put you guys on fast forward, and you'll get to see me put together this layout, this prayer response. I was really inspired by last week's page. I loved the effect with like the vintage papers and the collage. And so I kind of wanted to repeat and go along with that. So I actually used so there was this dyed paper that I used, and there were scraps of that on my desk. So I let that be the inspiration for this. I used some of the little collage sticker squares that Ingrid has in the shop. I'll link those down below. This is one of the large stickers from the devotional kit, one of the large white stickers that I tore apart and used. Used some of the rub-ons. Oh, here are those mixed media stickers. So these are just little mixed media sticker squares to use those to build up collage, some stamping, all that goodness. So let me go ahead, put you guys on fast forward, and you can see how I put together this layout as a prayer journal entry for 2 Corinthians 12, verses 7 through 10. All right. So here's a look at some of the pieces I pulled together. The first time I recorded, I told you all about them, but we'll explain it as we go along. So here I have all those torn pieces that were the leftovers of that page I used last week. These were created using the Distress Ink reinkers. I will link that video down below. It's just a shorts video, but it's super easy to follow along with. And I am using that Cocoina glue stick. You could use any glue stick. This paper is super, super thin. So if I use my Barely Arts glue, you can kind of see the glue through it. And so using the glue stick lets me get this adhered really well down to the page. And I'm not going to need to put like a matte gel medium or something over the top to like collage it. I'm wanting to be mindful that I am going to want to do some prayer journaling in here. So I'm trying not to go too mixed media, especially down in that bottom left-hand corner where I will be writing. So I am going to add some stamping though. I'm using these mixed media stamps from Open Journey. These are an older stamp, but I believe they're still in the shop. And ultimately, most of this ends up getting covered up. But at this point, I I don't know that. And that's just kind of the nature of mixed media. You build up layers, build up layers, build up layers, and you have to be okay with some things getting covered up along the way. It's just part of the process. So I am stamping that using some vintage photo archival ink. And then I'll layer a few more of these strips. I end up using every last bit of this particular sheet of paper. So even the pieces that are hanging off the edges, off camera, I end up cutting those and then sticking those down on the page as well. So we're just kind of building up all of these layers going horizontal and vertically. So I'm kind of creating these little like grid lines of sorts with the various pieces that I will be putting on here. So here's that large opaque white sticker that comes in the kit. I'm going to go ahead and tear the edges. Now, if you have the digital version, you could print this on clear sticker paper if you wanted to. But I'm going to show you how I'm going to help this blend in a little bit, but we're going to have that be the main kind of focal point in the center. I'm going to ink up the edges using some vintage photo distress ink. And this is going to knock back some of the white of the sticker paper to kind of help it blend in with the surrounding papers. And I really love the look that this ends up giving. And I love that it, Ingrid's messy like handwriting that's on there. So it's just fun. I'm going to use one of these tickets as part of my title as well. So I just use some pinking shears to give some texture to the edges of that. And then I'll ink that up with that same vintage photo distress ink. This just helps everything be cohesive and work together. Now, this particular ticket says deep calls to deep, but we're going to cover that up with a die cut later on since that's not the focus of today's particular prayer journaling entry. So here are those mixed media stickers. I've just picked a few that I think go along with this background, and then I'm kind of placing them kind of where I think they're going to go. And then before I stick them down, I am going to ink up the edges with some more of that vintage photo distress ink. Again, this just kind of helps everything be cohesive and work together. And I'm working with a very neutral palette. There's no color really. There's a little bit of blue in that ticket, but for the most part, I'm just focusing on, the browns and black and white and grays in this layout, which I really enjoy how that came together. And I was kind of mindful of these stickers that I picked out. I like the ones with the seals. These ones with the graphic words kind of tie in the graphic words of the center sticker piece. And then these are hard to peel once you've torn them. So you're just going to have to fuss around till you can get the backer sheet off. And you'll see where I use that same technique where I just cut away some of the backer, stick that down, and then I'm going to use my bone folder to smooth that out, really pressing into that center gutter of the pages. That way this easily closes, the book easily closes once I'm finished with it. This number 5 is actually from the digital files. That is not part of the physical kit, but there was 1 through 5, and then the word seek was in there as well. So then I have that die cut there that says seek his presence. That's going to cover up where it says deep calls to deep. And then I'm going to use some acrylic ink and a paintbrush to really messily, not perfect, write in the small whisper. So seek his presence in the small whisper, pulling that from the devotional content that Ingrid had for us. And, I could have done this in a variety of ways. I could have typed on there, stamped on there, but I wanted to kind of match the, scriptiness of the words in the center of that sticker there. And then I had a weird open gap, so I'm just going in with a few little cross details. The thing about mixed media is it gets to be messy, so it does not have to be perfect, which works for me. I wanted to incorporate some of these new rub-ons just because I love them. They're awesome. So I pulled out these postage stamp ones, and I'm going to layer one of these in there. You don't really see too much of it in the end, but it's just adding little bits of detail to the background. That's one thing I really love about mixed media backgrounds is it kind of invites you to sit with it for a little while and look at all of the details and all the layers and trying to figure out how it was put together. And that's just one of the reasons that I really love mixed media. And in the process of creating it, it's giving me time to reflect on the study, on what my prayer is going to be, praying the prayer I'm going to put in there. That's just all part of the process with mixed media. This particular stamp set, I do believe, is sold out. I'm stamping it in some black soot archival ink. There are a variety of different floral stamps still available in the shop, or you can use clear stickers. You could even use the new mixed media paper, has some florals on it. So there's lots of options that you could use for that stamping that I did. Now I decided to go in and take a palette knife and some white gesso. I didn't want a whole lot of texture on here, but I did feel like it needed a little something, a little contrast to kind of pull everything together. So I'm just brushing a little bit of this, scraping a little bit of it on some of the edges where different papers have come together. And it's just kind of, I don't know, adding a little something. There were just these giant brown spots of paper on the page. So this kind of helps blend things a little bit more and brings in a little bit of the white that we lost since I covered up the majority of the base of these pages. But I am being mindful to leave myself plenty of space in that bottom left-hand corner to write. It's really difficult to write over gesso, really difficult to write over, glue and things like that. So I'm trying to be careful about that. Now I can start gluing things down. There was this dove die cut in the die cuts. Really love incorporating that into these pages. Ingrid's artwork is it's beautiful. And there's all these different meanings in the pieces that she, creates for these kits. And so I love having those as little like hidden, where's Waldo in your layouts that you create. So off camera, I went ahead and journaled my prayer. And then I remembered that I had cut out these stickers. These are from the clear sticker sheets. They're right at the top. You almost could miss them. They look like branding, but they say, your face, O Lord, I will seek. And my heart said, seek his face. So I went ahead and included those as a finishing touch. And that is going to be it for the prayer journaling today. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope that you take advantage of those study notes, get some study time in there. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave those down below. Check out that description box for links to everything that I mentioned or used. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, if it was inspiring. Subscribe to my channel if you're not already subscribed. And until next time, thank you so much. Bye-bye.